for an art animator, they're kind of like, what? Trying to
I got out of,
I'm born anyways.
I got out of 6 classes.
Does the way that architecture shall go about how many
Good.
years right there?
Yeah. Generally, yes. It's all based on experience. Yes, what kind of experience you get.
Like you said, I can show you the point that
That's what I did with
which are
Italian.
graduated from DCTs. Are they starting like good amount of money to work?
Same as a 6-year.
You can try out
Like,
too, like the.
I mean,
the plus
I'm
one.
not.
Oh, 15, 20 bucks an hour starting pay.
I don't know.
Yeah, they're decent sound. I mean, look at the job postings over in the glass case in Maloneyville. Good opportunities.
It's not big.
Okay, the greatest architectural related video you've ever seen, we watched last time. And I have a few quiz questions to ask you to see how well you remember. But I will tell you the good news is now, if you go into your file folder on Blackboard on Gothic, you will find that video link there. So if you want to watch it again, which I would recommend you do, because it is an incredible amount of information about the Gothic. It is, dare I say it, better than Trachtenberg. It really is a good video. But did anybody recall them using the term cathedra in the beginning of that video? What that term meant, cathedra, was a Latin word that literally means the throne or the seat of a bishop. So the term cathedral comes from that word relating to the bishop and also relating to how those cathedrals were the administrative centers for the diocese that they served. Now, what's a diocese? Anybody know? It's sort of a subdivision, if you will, of areas in a hierarchy of church governance. So, for example, in Kentucky, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 dioceses. There's one in Lexington. There's a diocese of Covington. There's a diocese of Owensboro and a diocese of Louisville. And the diocese of Louisville, that bishop, each one of them have bishops, each one of them have cathedrals. But in Louisville, that's an archdiocese, which technically is over all of Kentucky. So the bishop in Louisville is an archbishop. So in Covington, there is a cathedral called the Covington Cathedral, but it's also the church of the, it's not the Annunciation, it's the, I can't remember the name of it. But has anybody ever been to the Covington Cathedral? Because it was designed and built in the 1890s based on Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. It is one of the few examples nearby of a building that you can go to and get a sense of what these Gothic cathedrals were like. It's an incredible place. So, hopefully you also recognized in the video that these cathedrals, as well as these emerging cities, were magnets for trade and commerce. And another important thing to help us sort of put ourselves back in those Middle Ages was when that nice lady was walking and talking about how if you were born in the Middle Ages, that God was the most important thing in your life every day, that every event in your life, good and bad, was all part of God's plan. So when you understand that, it's as if, well, no wonder they were willing to expend such effort and resources in building these cathedrals, because it was for God, the dominant motivating factor in all the Middle Ages. And of course they were expensive to build, but that chapter, those groups of people who managed the building of the cathedral and paid for the materials and hired the master builder, the one who said, Master Guion should build us the tallest, the widest, the most splendid cathedral in all of France. And the bishop said, oh, we must guard against the sin of pride. And he quipped back, oh, but it's all for the honor and glory of God. And that reflects, too, the philosophy that was predominant at that time period, that Neoplatonism, sort of that, well, we're not really worthy, but we like all these nice, beautiful things like cathedrals, and because we're doing it for God, makes it okay. Okay. So, one of the other great comments in that video was when Master Guion was explaining the building to the bishop, the first bishop, the good bishop. And he expressed it this way. He said, you will see that this cathedral will be an expression of God's hand in nature. Now, what I find so fascinating about that comment is, for people who had never seen a Gothic cathedral in that time frame, to conceptualize how that thing was going to be built. And remember, Pierre even said early on, it's as if Master Guion is building no walls at all. And he wasn't. He was building all columns and piers and flying buttresses. And looking at that kind of a footprint, starting out and the way it began to grow, was just mind-boggling to the average person at that time. Because they were thinking in terms of, you build walls, and then you build a roof system. And this method of building defied all that. So it had to be the house of God, because how else could it stand up being built that way? So it all ties in with these basic themes of the Middle Ages. Okay, now who remembers the Church of Saint Denis? What do you remember about it?
It's a good building. It's in Rome.
No, it isn't. Huh? It's in France. It was the first example of Gothic.
Oh, I got confused about the other room.
Okay. That was the church that Abbot Suger, spelled like sugar, with an E, and Saint Denis, spelled like Dennis with one N, but pronounced Denis. That was where the Gothic began. Okay. And we also learned in the video that he didn't invent the stained glass window, but he used it on a scale never used before. And of course, there were comparisons made throughout the video between different cathedrals. And our main feature cathedral was Chartres Cathedral in Chartres, France. And it was compared with some other cathedrals, and the major comparison was with the amount of stone that was used in Chartres. And you may recall there was a comparison with the cathedral at Bourges, and how much longer and more slender the flying buttresses were at Bourges, rather than those short, stubby, massive flying buttresses at Chartres. And it all goes back to the fact that, unlike today, the builders from the Middle Ages, they didn't have technology to test stone effectively. Of course, Master Guion could look at it and tell that some was bad, and he paid a very high price for using bad stone from the bad bishop. But they didn't have the ability to calculate what the forces and loads were acting on those buildings. So they didn't want to take any chances at Chartres. They used more stone, which contributed to the expense of the building. Not only for the cost of the material, but stone is expensive to build with because of the transportation costs, because of the labor costs. It's just an expensive building material overall. Okay. What about the pinnacles? Anybody remember anything about the pinnacles from the video? First of all, you got to remember what the pinnacle was. Anybody recall what a For years, it was thought it was a decorative element, but later research showed that the pinnacles actually help the flying buttresses transfer the load more effectively. And I used the analogy in the other class. Somebody said, well, I don't see how that could happen. So if I'm leaning against this table and my arm is like a flying buttress, there's a tendency as I lean more for my hand to want to slide across that table. Well, if you were to put a weight on my hand or do a Luca Brasi on my hand, you know what a Luca Brasi is, don't you? From the movie The Godfather, when they murdered Luca Brasi in the bar, one guy held his hand down on the bar and another guy put a knife through his hand to hold it at the bar. Well, that's what a pinnacle would be doing. It would stop
Were you guys
my
thinking
hand.
of something?
Okay, you guys didn't watch The Godfather?
Next class.
Oh, The Godfather.
Part 1.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Luca Brasi, you
Yeah,
know?
Yeah, I
Make
thought the
him an
video.
offer he can't refuse.
I thought the video you were talking about video.
Oh, different video.
Right. Godfather. I watched this. Now I understand.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Luca Brasi. Okay, so the pinnacles would act as a weight on the flying buttress to help redirect those lateral forces in a more vertical direction down to the ground. Okay, so that's what the pinnacles were found to do. Okay, now what about the sculpted portals? Now, do you recall what we said the portals were? Doorways. And we called them that with the Romanesque, the portal doorway. And in the Romanesque, they were articulated thick walls, and they had blind arches and colonnettes as they moved back through the thickness of the wall. But in the case of the Gothic, they began to line them with sculpture, stacked one on top of the other. And as we're going to see, the sculpture was so much more lifelike. And even to the extent that it said that it was the people of the town who posed for the sculpture in those buildings. So literally, when you go to a cathedral like Chartres and you look at that sculpture, you're seeing the people who were there when the cathedral was built. And it carries over a lot of the things the ancient Greeks were doing with sculpture and their buildings. Okay, so, all right, we know the 13th century, the cities were trade magnets. There was a good relationship between the monarchy and the clergy ruling the people. Bishops were very politically powerful. How about the financing of the cathedrals? Who ended up paying for them? Who? Yeah, people, the peasants. They were taxed. They had to borrow money from business people and tradespeople who were happy to lend them money because they knew the cathedral would generate more business and they'd get high interest rates anyway. So, yeah, it was on the backs of the peasants, basically. Okay. So another thing that I thought was done particularly well in the video was how they were showing the centering and the forms that were used to build those vaulted ceilings, and they would reuse the forms as they went from bay to bay. Very good. A form of modular construction, because they would all be the same and they were reusing the forms. So what about the master builder? Remember the segment where they showed the tools the master builder would use? Was it like Bluebeam construction software? Had a little handheld pilot or something? Had 3D views of the building as he was walking through it? No, nothing like that. Very simple tools, measuring sticks, calipers, levels. That was it. But what a master builder had to have was very good management skills. Because as we learned with all of those different stonemasons, they all wanted to work in their own style. So he had to manage and terms of the food chain in construction, the Freemasons were at the top. They could pick and choose projects and jobs they wanted to work because they did all the intricate carving for the tracery of the windows and the sculpture. So they were very much in demand. And if they didn't like what was going on at a particular job, they could move to another town because the jobs were there. Sort of like a 2-year architecture technologist. Jobs were there for them. Okay, whereas the rough masons, of course, cut the big pieces of stone. All right, so we've already talked about the chapter, that group of people that hired the master builder, bought the material, took care of all the finances, etc. And as we look at chart, we'll note that 43 different trades were represented in the stained glass windows. So what that tells us is there was really an integration of not only the religious, because there are saints too, and angels, but also the people of the town, this integration of the religious and the townspeople. So that was very good. Secular, it's also called. So a lot of pride taken. All right, so stage for the Mass. 3-dimensional picture book of religious instruction. What a great video. And as I said, if you open up your Gothic page, you will find Gothic folder. Look, there it is. Okay, but that's not where we're going to go. I have a short PowerPoint on French Gothic. As a result of the video, as I say, the video is really power-packed. So the first thing we always want to remember, the 3 elements that are normally associated with Gothic. Rib vaults, flying buttresses, pointed arches. But we also learned that they were also in some Romanesque buildings. So what did we learn made a Romanesque building, even if it had these elements? It was the walls that supported the structure. The walls and the pillars. No flying buttresses on the outside of the building. Okay. Now, here is a floor plan of Saint Denis showing just mainly this new addition, this Gothic addition that was done in 1081 AD. And first of all, if you're not schooled in reading floor plans, what do you think these dark areas represent in plan?
Columns?
Yeah, they're the columns and the exterior wall supports. So everything else in this building that you see is all open space. There are no walls separating the space. And these sort of diagonal lines represent all of the rib vaults that are occurring in the ceiling above. So an open plan, yet we still see the image of an ambulatory going through that space, and a choir and altar area, and even radiating chapels. But the difference is, this is all one open floor plan, with the exception of the columns that are there. Very different from the walls that separated the spaces in the Romanesque. Here is an overall plan of the Abbey of Saint Denis, and it shows a bunch of overlaid places and spaces and materials over time, and you can even see remnants of previous apses and even choir areas, but it's all sort of superimposed by this new open Gothic addition. So it happened over time, the whole church, which is why oftentimes it's rather confusing to date or name a style of a church. Well, all this may be Romanesque, but if we've got this incredible addition of this Gothic choir, is it a Gothic church or is it a Romanesque church? Well, the informed individual says it's a little bit of both. And here's why. But that's the important thing to understand. Now here we have an interior view of Saint Denis, and you can indeed see the columns and the rib vaulting and the pointed arches. And this is a very nice cross-sectional drawing of a typical Gothic construction. And starting at the very bottom, we see that they break it up into the side aisle and the central or main nave. And then along the interior, we have several different levels. The first level being what they call the main arcade, which is the same in an early Christian church or even a Romanesque church. But in this case, we have pointed arches. And then we have this added triforium area, which has window openings, or wall openings, I should say, along with the roof area above the side aisle. And then the clear story area, which we also saw in early Christian churches and Romanesque, the area above the roof over the side aisle. But in the case of the Gothic, now we're seeing flying buttresses and these independent buttresses on the outside of the building, along with pinnacles. And of course, all of that is there to support the thrusts from all of these rib vaults that are concentrating the loads at points along that exterior wall, which are essentially columns that allow those areas of wall to open up for large open areas or glass areas, because they're not load bearing. There's absolutely nothing that this wall has to support but itself, because all of the ceiling and all of the roof is being supported at points and carried out to the flying buttresses. That's the magic of Macy's, if you will, or the grandeur of Gothic. Does that work? Okay, and here's another nice cutaway drawing illustration. And hopefully by now you're beginning to understand how these elements work in conjunction with one another. Starting at the very top of the photograph, you can still see the outline of the roof, which was a timber truss roof still on these buildings. It wasn't until you got to the ceiling area where the vaulting occurred and all the webbing, but you can see that there are those flying buttresses that are accepting all of those loads from those ribs. And we move to this bay, and it's just showing the ribs and how the ribs are going diagonally and transversely, but all to this point, this point, this point, and this point. And then in the very final stage, you just see the colonnettes coming up. And I thought the video did a nice job of showing graphically how the church elements grew up out of the ground and came together. So it's pretty phenomenal structure. And I think Gothic, you may have heard it referred to as truly a skeletal type of construction, because the elements do look sort of like skeleton bones in a way. And they are like fingers transferring loads from one point to another. So it's pretty good with skeletal to be associated with Halloween, don't you think? Skeletons, skeleton. You get it. Okay. And here we have a panoramic view of Saint Denis, and of course it's taken with one of those old view cameras, so it kind of distorts what you really would see, but nonetheless you do get the sense that it is a wide open space in the interior. And good old Abbot Sujet in the stained glass window. The guy who, well, had the vision for Gothic to begin. And that vision was he saw God's presence in the form of light. And he wanted to let more light fill the interior of the churches to illustrate God's presence. So Gothic, much like Byzantine architecture, is what we call a transcendental style. It's of the spirit and the mind, because Gothic soars heavenward and lets in this light that represents the presence of God. So unlike a Roman basilica, this is trying to express, like the Byzantine style did, the feelings and beliefs of Christianity. And then Suget's cup. Trachtenberg talks a lot about Suget's cup, and we should too. So you look at Suget's cup, and you can see it's a pretty fancy cup. It's gold, it's got jewels embedded in it, very nice. So this cup is really a chalice. So in the ritual of the Christian Mass, what is the chalice used for?
What?
The blood. And the bread gets put in there too sometimes. So what we're to take from this is, there's a big word that describes this called the transubstantiation, which means the act of, the magic of the priest being able to change the bread and the wine into the body and blood of Christ. So this is a pretty important vessel. So it should be jeweled up and golded up and all that, right? But Abbot Suget, he's the one that got to hold it, got to look at it. So again, more of this Neoplatonism, the we're not worthy, but yeah, we're worthy. It's okay to have these nice things if it's for the honor and glory of God. And this would certainly be one of the greatest statements about doing for the honor and glory of God. Okay, interior view again. How vertical, how skeletal, how thin all these elements appear, and how much glass there is. Absolutely incredible. And the sculpture. Here we have some of the sculpture from one of the doorways at Chartres. And how would you compare the quality of the facial features and the robes with the work of Gisli Berdus? Gisli Berdus. You missed that video too.
Yeah.
Well, Gisli Berdus was much more primitive. These are much more lifelike. But notice how they seem to be just suspended. It's almost as if somebody put a big strip of Velcro on their back and slammed them against the wall. They're sort of just hanging there. So as advanced as they got in their sculpture and artwork, when we move to the Renaissance, we're going to see even further developments of more lifelike sculpture. They developed this technique, they call it what? Contrapposto, where they sort of pose with shifted hips and they look more natural rather than the way these guys look.
So we can say they put movement.
Well,
When the Renaissance came.
no, I wouldn't exactly say that. That happens more in the Baroque period where they get movement, but the Renaissance gives more of a realistic, lifelike presence. Whereas, I mean, these are pretty lifelike, but the way they're sort of hung on the wall, they don't have a real presence about them. And that Renaissance is all about reality. Reality. Oh, and look at these guys. Don't they look so sculpture-esque?
Yeah.
Pretty good detail. And most likely some townsperson posed for that sculpture. So we're really looking at the people who built Chartres Cathedral in these images. And oh, look at this image of the stained glass. Now, I'm going to give you a little comparison technique here. Let's make a visual comparison. You got a fixation of those images, stained glass at Chartres, that whole visual composition, and we go back a few slides and we look at Saint Denis. We're going to study Saint Denis and fixate upon it. And then we're going to go back to Chartres. And what would be a visual comparison you could make? We're almost done. thin these colonnettes are and these lancet windows. There's more glass and less separation between the glass. And this is just a further illustration of the amount of stone that was used at Sharp. Much more stone than was necessary. Even this rose window at Sharp, all this dark, that's the tracery. That's a lot of stone. They didn't take any chances anywhere with Sharp. Okay. Now, very quickly, in the last minute or two, I want to open the PowerPoint on English Gothic and just show you very quickly some examples. But I first want to tell you that when we move to England to look at Gothic, just like when we're going to move to Italy, there are regional variations in the Gothic, just like there were in Romanesque. But in the case of the Gothic in England, there was French influence, of course, and Romanesque influence. So we're going to see a heavier looking Gothic. And of course, 3 phases, which we'll come back to. But for now, I just want to look at the plan of a very early Gothic edition, Canterbury Cathedral and other Gothic updates. And it said that English Gothic also exhibits a form of organic architecture. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, those of you who have ever visited Falling Water know that it is touted as being a great example of organic architecture because it fits into its site so well. And the stone that's used in the building is the same stone that it's sitting on a ledge. And the cantilevers of the terraces mimic the shelves in the creek that create the waterfall. So it really looks like it grew off of the side of the mountain. Well, this too had been a previous choir, an altar, and they sort of ripped it off, and it's as if a new one with these little wings that look like transepts grew out of the old church. So that's the element of organic that Trachtenberg was referring to. We look at the exterior, it's definitely a heavier, more massive looking form of Gothic. And in the interior, this is where we'll stop, notice that yes, we have verticality like we did in the French Gothic, but we also have competing horizontal elements. And there were 2 architects that were involved in the design of this building. One was William of Sens, a Frenchman. The other was a William from England. And apparently, they didn't see eye to eye on a lot of these design elements. And ultimately, William of Sens was injured on the job site and had to go home, never to return. So William of England got his way. So the things we want to notice about this interior view are the shorter, squattier, more massive looking proportions, first of all. And also these horizontal elements that seem to be competing visually with the verticality of the colonnettes. And thirdly, look at the mix of the dark stone. There's a dark stone here, here, in these colonnettes, in this colonnette. So the English were beginning to introduce polychromy stone as well. So those 3 major deviations from the French begin to define the characteristics of English Gothic. And it gets wilder, but we'll talk about that on Thursday. So, see you then.
See you then.
All right.
Have you ever gone to the cathedral? One of them watching the video. Have you ever visited the cathedral?
Chartres Cathedral? No, I have not. I've only been to France in the airport.
Like what? Like what?
I can't remember the name of it. I don't know. It's been a long time ago.
So, I guess I have more questions, but maybe
Yes.